She stood alone at the altar, flowers trembling in her hands, mascara running down her cheeks, and hundreds of eyes watching her break. But before despair could consume her, a commanding voice echoed through the crowd. "Don't cry, I'll marry you instead." What would you do if the person you loved abandoned you in front of everyone? Would you break, or accept a chance at something greater? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story is about Amira Brooks, a caramel-skinned, hard-working, and quietly resilient woman who believed love was real until her world shattered in public. But sometimes the end of one dream is the start of something far better. This is also the story of Knox Everett, her billionaire boss with a past he never speaks of and feelings he never dared express until that unforgettable day. Their story isn't perfect. It's messy, filled with unresolved secrets, betrayal, bold decisions, and forbidden passion. But above all, it's real. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I would be glad to know that these lessons reach people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you so much for being part of this growing community. You guys are amazing. Let's begin. Amira stood at the altar, her white gown trailing behind her like a river of silk, catching the soft glow of the chandelier above. The air buzzed with anticipation, hundreds of eyes fixed on her, waiting for the moment that would seal her future. She smoothed her hands over the fabric, her fingers trembling slightly, though she forced a smile. Drew would be here any second. He had to be. The organ hummed faintly in the background, a melody that should have soothed her, but instead tightened the knot in her chest. She glanced at the towering arched doors at the back of the cathedral, still closed, still silent. The murmurs started low, a ripple moving through the crowd like wind across a still lake. She caught fragments. "Where is he?" And her pulse quickened. The priest shifted beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, his calm demeanor doing little to ease the growing unease. 10 minutes late turned to 20. 20 stretched into 30. Amira's smile faltered, her breath shallow as she scanned the faces in the pews. Her mother twisting a handkerchief, her best friend Lila mouthing "It's fine" with a forced grin. But it wasn't fine. The emptiness beside her was a gaping wound, and every tick of the clock deepened it. The doors creaked open, and a collective gasp swept through the room. Amira's heart leapt. Drew. But it wasn't him. It was Jasper, his brother, striding down the aisle with a purpose that made her stomach twist. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and in his hand he clutched a folded piece of paper. The whispers crescendoed as he reached her, his eyes avoiding hers for a moment before locking on with a weight she couldn't decipher. "Amira," he said, his voice low but steady. "He's not coming." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She stared at him, uncomprehending, as the note trembled slightly in his grip. "What do you mean he's not coming?" Her voice cracked louder than she intended, and the crowd hushed. Jasper hesitated, then handed her the paper. "He left this. I found it in his room an hour ago." Her fingers shook as she unfolded it, the scrawl unmistakably Drew's. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." 5 words. That was all. No explanation, no goodbye, just a gut punch in ink. The paper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor, and a sob clawed its way up her throat. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting it back, but the tears came anyway, hot and relentless. The room tilted, the faces blurring into a sea of pity and shock. "Amira," Jasper started, reaching out, but she flinched away, her knees threatening to buckle. The priest murmured something about giving her space, but the noise of the crowd swelled again. Gasps, questions, the clatter of someone dropping a program. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear into the floor and never face this moment again. Then a shadow moved through the aisle. Not Jasper, but someone else, taller, broader, with a presence that seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. Knox Everett. Drew's boss, the billionaire CEO whose name alone commanded headlines, a man who'd been sitting quietly among the guests until now. His tailored suit was impeccable, his dark hair swept back, but it was his eyes, sharp, unreadable, that pinned her in place as he approached. He stopped a few feet from her, the murmurs dying down as every head turned. For a moment he said nothing, just studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then he stepped closer, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Don't cry," he said, firm but not harsh. "I'll marry you instead." The room erupted. Amira blinked, certain she'd misheard, but Knox didn't flinch. His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching, as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell that shattered every expectation. Jasper froze beside her, his mouth half open, while the priest coughed, fumbling with his collar. "What?" Amira's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the rising tide of voices. She shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. "What are you saying?" Knox didn't waver. "I mean it. Right here, right now. You don't have to walk out of this alone." The absurdity of it hit her first. A stranger, no, not a stranger, but Drew's boss, offering to step into the wreckage of her wedding day. She laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed in the stunned silence. "You can't be serious." "I am." His tone left no room for doubt, and he took another step forward, close enough that she could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. "You're not the one who should be humiliated today. Let me fix this." Her mind reeled. Fix this? As if a marriage proposal from a man she barely knew could erase the gaping hole Drew had left. She glanced at Jasper, who looked as blindsided as she felt, then back at Knox. His expression was a mask, calm, controlled, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of determination she couldn't place. "Why?" she demanded, her voice shaking but louder now. "Why would you do this?" Knox's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I can, and because you deserve better than to be left like this." The crowd was a roar now, some shouting questions, others snapping photos with their phones. But Amira barely heard them. Her chest heaved, her thoughts a tangle of grief and disbelief. She should say no. She should walk away, gather what was left of her dignity, and leave this nightmare behind. But then she thought of the headlines, jilted bride abandoned at altar, and the pity that would follow her for years. She thought of Drew, wherever he was, free of this moment while she drowned in it. "Amira," Jasper cut in, his voice tight. "You don't have to do anything. Let's just go." "No," she said, surprising herself with the force of it. She turned back to Knox, searching his face for a trap, a lie, anything to make sense of this. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he replied, and there it was again. That flicker, something unspoken lurking in his gaze. She swallowed hard, the tears drying on her cheeks, as a strange resolve settled over her. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was spite, but in that moment she didn't care. She nodded, a single sharp motion. "Fine, do it." The priest stammered. Miss, are you certain?" "Do it," she repeated, her voice steel now, and Knox's mouth curved into something that might have been approval. The ceremony was a blur. Knox's hand was warm against hers, his grip steady as the priest stumbled through the vows. She echoed the words mechanically. "I take you to have and to hold," her mind screaming that this wasn't real, couldn't be real. But it was. The ring he slid onto her finger, a simple band he'd pulled from his own hand, felt heavy, foreign, and when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the room exploded again. Knox leaned in, his breath brushing her ear. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured, and then he kissed her. A brief, firm press of his lips that sent a jolt through her she didn't expect. She pulled back, dazed, as the reality crashed in. She was married to Knox Everett, not Drew. The cameras flashed, a storm of light and sound, and she caught Lila's wide-eyed stare from the front row, her mother's hand pressed to her mouth. Jasper stood rigid, the note still crumpled on the floor at his feet. Knox offered his arm and she took it, her legs unsteady as they turned to face the crowd. "What happens now?" she whispered, barely audible over the chaos. "Now," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we figure out why he ran. And what he's hiding." Her breath caught. "You know something." "I suspect," he corrected, guiding her down the aisle as the guests parted like a sea. "And I don't like being kept in the dark." The doors loomed ahead, the world beyond them a mystery she wasn't ready for. But as they stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face, Amira realized something. This wasn't just about saving her from humiliation. Knox had his own reasons, his own questions, and she'd just tied herself to them. What had she walked into? And why did the thought of finding out send a thrill through her, sharp and dangerous, despite the ache still burning in her chest? The car waited at the curb, sleek and black, a driver holding the door open. Knox paused, turning to her, his eyes searching hers. "You can still walk away," he said, quieter now, almost gentle. "No one would blame you." She met his gaze, her chin lifting. "I don't run either." His smile was real this time, brief but sharp, and he gestured to the car. "Then let's see where this takes us." As they slid inside, the door closing behind them, Amira's mind raced. Drew's note, Knox's certainty, the weight of the ring on her finger. Something was coming, something big, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she'd said yes, and there was no turning back now. The car ride had been a haze, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows, as Amira's mind churned with questions she couldn't voice. Knox sat beside her, silent but watchful, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her thoughts. She'd clutched the edge of her gown, the fabric bunching under her fingers, and wondered how she'd gone from bride-to-be to whatever this was. Wife of a billionaire, a stranger, a man who'd stepped into her chaos with a promise and a secret she couldn't yet grasp. When they'd arrived at his building, a towering glass monolith that pierced the skyline, he'd led her to the penthouse without a word, the elevator's hum the only sound between them. Now sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, pulling Amira from a restless sleep. She blinked, disoriented, the plush expanse of a king-sized bed beneath her unfamiliar. The room was stark, modern, white walls, black furniture, a view of the city sprawling below like a map she couldn't read. Her wedding gown lay crumpled over a chair, a stark reminder of yesterday, and she was in a soft, oversized shirt she didn't remember putting on. Her heart thudded as she sat up, the events crashing back. Drew's note, Knox's voice, the vows she'd spoken in a daze. The door opened and Knox stepped in, a tray in his hands. Coffee, toast, a glass of orange juice. He was dressed casually now, a dark sweater and jeans, but the air of command clung to him like a second skin. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. His tone was even, but his eyes flicked over her, assessing. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse, the words scraping her throat. "My place," he replied, pulling a chair closer and sitting. "You passed out in the car. I didn't think you'd want to wake up to a hotel full of reporters." She rubbed her temples, the ache behind her eyes pulsing. "This is real, isn't it?" "Yesterday." "Very real." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "But it doesn't have to stay that way. I can have papers drawn up by noon, annulment, clean break. No one has to know the details." The offer hung there, practical, tempting. She could walk away, pretend this never happened, rebuild her life out of the wreckage. But something in his tone, too smooth, too easy, made her pause. She studied him, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the way he watched her like he was waiting for her to bolt. "Why did you do it?" she asked instead, her voice steadier now. "You didn't have to." Knox's expression didn't shift, but his fingers tapped once against the armrest. "I told you. You deserved better than that." "That's not an answer." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the dizziness that followed. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why?" He stood, moving to the window, his back to her as he looked out over the city. "Maybe I don't like seeing someone else's mess left for others to clean up. Maybe I saw a chance to do something about it." He turned, his gaze locking with hers. "Or maybe I have my own reasons. Does it matter?" "It does to me." She stood too, her bare feet sinking into the thick carpet, her borrowed shirt hanging loose around her thighs. "I'm not some charity case." "Never said you were." His voice softened just a fraction. "But you're in this now, and so am I. If you want out, say it. If not, we figure out what's next." She opened her mouth to argue, to demand more, but the weight of his words settled over her. Out meant running. Back to the pity, the questions, the void Drew had left. Staying meant... what? A marriage born of impulse? A man she barely knew? Yet the idea of facing this alone felt worse. "No annulment," she said finally, the decision surprising her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "Not yet." He nodded, a flicker of something, approval, maybe, crossing his face. "All right, then we—" The sharp ring of a phone cut him off, and he pulled it from his pocket, his brow furrowing as he glanced at the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping toward the door. "Eat something. We'll talk after." She watched him go, the door clicking shut behind him, and sank back onto the bed. The coffee was still warm when she picked it up, the bitterness grounding her as she tried to piece together what she'd just committed to. Knox's penthouse was a fortress, sleek, impenetrable, but it didn't feel like a cage. Not yet. She took a sip, then another, her mind racing. What did he mean about Drew's mess? What wasn't he telling her? The door burst open again, but it wasn't Knox this time. A woman stormed in, her heels clicking against the hardwood like gunfire. She was older, her silver blonde hair swept into an elegant twist, her designer coat flaring behind her like a cape. Her eyes, ice blue and furious, locked onto Amira with a force that made her freeze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Who the hell are you?" the woman demanded, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. Amira set the cup down, her pulse spiking. "Don't bother," the woman snapped, waving a manicured hand. "I know exactly who you are, the little bride my son decided to play hero for. What I want to know is why you're still here." "Your son," Amira's stomach dropped. "You're Knox's mother." "Vivian Everett," she said, her name a declaration. She crossed the room, stopping a few feet away, her gaze raking over Amira like she was sizing up an intruder. "And you're the girl who's turned my family into a tabloid circus. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't," Amira started, but Vivian cut her off. "Spare me. I saw the footage. My son marrying some stranger in front of half the city, all because her fiancé couldn't keep his promises. And now you're what? Living here, playing house." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "This ends now. Whatever game you're running, it's over." "I'm not running anything," Amira shot back, standing again, her hands curling into fists. "I didn't ask for this. Knox did." "Knox doesn't do anything without a reason," Vivienne said, her eyes narrowing. "And I intend to find out what it is. You think you've stumbled into a fairy tale? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The door opened again, and Knox stepped in, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Mother," he said, his voice low, controlled. "What are you doing here?" Vivienne turned on him, her fury shifting targets. "What am I doing here? What are you doing, Knox? Marrying this girl, without a word to me? Do you know what the board is saying? The press? This isn't a game." "It's not your call," he replied, stepping between her and Amira. "It's done." "Done?" Vivienne's voice rose, incredulous. "You think you can just rewrite your life, our lives, like this? She's a liability, Knox, a nobody. Get rid of her." Amira bristled, but Knox's hand lifted slightly, a silent signal to hold back. "She's my wife," he said, the words calm but edged with steel. "And she's staying. You don't get a vote." Vivienne stared at him, her lips thinning into a hard line. "You're making a mistake, and when it falls apart, because it will, don't expect me to clean it up." She turned on her heel, her coat snapping behind her as she stormed out, the door slamming with a force that echoed. Knox exhaled, running a hand through his hair before turning to Amira. "You okay?" "No," she said, her voice trembling with anger and confusion. "What was that? Why does she hate me?" "She doesn't hate you," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "She hates not being in control. And this—" He gestured vaguely between them. "This caught her off guard." "There's more, isn't there?" Amira pressed, stepping closer. "You're not telling me everything." He met her gaze, and for a moment she thought he'd deflect again. But then he nodded just once. "There's more. About Drew. About why I did this. But you need to decide if you really want to know." Her breath hitched. Another open door, another choice. She could feel the tension coiling tighter, the unanswered questions piling up like storm clouds. "Tell me," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "All of it." Knox's jaw tightened and he gestured to the chair. "Sit. This might take a while." The memory of that kiss lingered like the storm's aftermath, the air in the penthouse charged with an unspoken current Amira couldn't shake. She'd climbed back to her room that night, her skin still warm where Knox had touched her, her mind a whirlwind of questions she couldn't voice. He'd vanished into his own space, leaving her with the echo of his lips and the weight of his unfinished words. "I shouldn't have," ringing in her ears. Sleep had been fitful, the thunder fading but the tension between them growing louder in her chest. By morning, they'd moved around each other in careful silence, a dance of avoidance that only sharpened her confusion. Now another stormy night gripped the city, the sky splitting open with jagged bolts of lightning that painted the penthouse in fleeting silver. Amira stood by the massive windows, watching rain lash the glass, her reflection a ghost against the chaos outside. She hadn't seen Knox all day. He'd been locked in his office, buried in calls and papers. But his absence only amplified the pull she felt, a thread tugging her toward him despite every reason to resist. The clock ticked past midnight and she should have been in bed, but the restless energy in her bones wouldn't let her rest. She turned from the window, intending to grab a glass of water, when her bare foot caught the edge of the slick marble stairs leading down to the main floor. Time slowed as she pitched forward, a sharp yelp escaping her lips, her arms flailing for balance. The railing was too far, the drop too steep, but then he was there. Knox materialized from the shadows, his hands catching her waist, pulling her back against him with a force that stole her breath. "Got you," he said, his voice rough, close enough that she felt it rumble through his chest. His grip steadied her, one arm wrapping around her middle, the other bracing her shoulder as she regained her footing. Thunder growled outside, shaking the walls, but all she could hear was her pulse pounding in her ears. She turned in his hold, her hands landing on his chest, and the lightning lit him up. Dark hair tousled, eyes stormy, a plain black shirt clinging to his frame. He'd been awake too, she realized, the faint lines of exhaustion etched into his face. "Thanks," she managed, her voice unsteady, hyper-aware of how little space separated them. "You need to watch those stairs," he said, but he didn't let go, his hands lingering, warm through the thin fabric of her borrowed shirt. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then snapped back up, and the air thickened, heavy with everything they hadn't said since the last time they'd stood this close. "I'm fine," she whispered, though she wasn't, not with him looking at her like that, like he was fighting something he couldn't name. Her fingers curled against his shirt, anchoring her as the storm raged on. "Are you?" His voice dipped, a challenge in it, and he stepped closer, closing the gap until she could feel the heat radiating off him. The tension coiled tighter, a wire ready to snap, and she didn't know if she wanted to pull away or pull him in. She didn't get the chance to decide. Knox's hand slid up to her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, and then he kissed her. It wasn't tentative, wasn't gentle, it was a flood breaking loose, passionate and raw, his lips claiming hers with a hunger that set her alight. She gasped into it, her hands sliding to his shoulders, gripping hard as she kissed him back, matching his fire. The storm outside was nothing compared to this. His mouth moving against hers, his fingers threading into her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Thunder crashed, shaking the floor, and he pressed her against the railing, the cold metal a sharp contrast to the heat of him. It was overwhelming, confusing, every doubt, every question drowned in the taste of him, the way he held her like she was air he needed to breathe. Her heart raced, her mind screaming that this was too much, too fast, but her body didn't care, arching into him as the kiss deepened, a tangle of need and something deeper she couldn't name. He broke away first, breathing hard, his forehead pressed to hers as the rain hammered the windows. "Amira," he rasped, her name a broken sound, and she felt the tremor in his hands where they still held her. "Don't," she cut in, her voice shaky but firm, her lips tingling from the force of him. "Don't take it back." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes dark, conflicted, a storm of their own. I didn't plan this," he said, his words rough, unguarded. "Neither did I," she admitted, her chest heaving, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "But it's here." He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in, and for a moment she thought he'd kiss her again. But he stepped back, letting go, the space between them cold and jarring. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steadier now, though his gaze still burned. "About everything." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself, the kiss still echoing through her. "Yeah, we do." He ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the storm outside, then back at her. "Tomorrow," he said, a promise and a delay all at once. Then he turned, climbing the stairs, leaving her standing there, caught between the lightning and the fire he'd ignited. Her breath steadied, but her mind didn't. That kiss, it was more than a moment. It was a shift, a crack in the walls they'd both built, and it left her reeling. Why had he done it? Why had she let him? The questions swirled, tangled with the heat still coursing through her, and she knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about Drew anymore. It was about them. Have you ever caught unexpected feelings for someone you never imagined? Let us know how that played out for you in the comments. The echo of that stormy night clung to Amira like a second skin, the memory of Knox's kiss a live wire in her veins. They danced around it the next day, his promise of, "We need to talk," dissolving into clipped exchanges and stolen glances. He'd been pulled into urgent calls, leaving her to wrestle with the heat of his touch and the cold distance that followed. The penthouse felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken words, and when he'd finally emerged from his office that evening, his jaw tight, he'd said, "We're going out tomorrow. A gala. Be ready." No explanation, just a command. And she'd nodded, too tangled in her own thoughts to argue. Now Amira stood in a sleek black gown that hugged her curves, the fabric cool against her skin as she adjusted the delicate silver necklace Knox had left on her dresser with a note. "Wear this." The gala was a glittering affair, a ballroom awash in crystal chandeliers and the murmur of wealth, hosted by Everett Enterprises to charm investors and flaunt power. Knox was at her side, impeccable in a tailored tux, his hand brushing her lower back as he guided her through the crowd. His touch was steady, possessive, and every time his fingers grazed her, the memory of that kiss flared anew, passionate, confusing, a question she couldn't answer. "You're quiet," he said, his voice low as they paused near a champagne fountain, the bubbles catching the light. His eyes flicked over her, searching, and she wondered if he felt it too, the pull, the tension, the unspoken storm between them. "Just taking it in," she replied, forcing a smile, her gaze sweeping the room. Men in suits, women in gowns, all watching them with thinly veiled curiosity. The billionaire CEO and his impulsive bride, a story no one could resist. "This isn't exactly my world." "It is now," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, and his hand lingered a moment longer before dropping. "You're doing fine." She wasn't so sure. The whispers followed them. Who is she? How long will this last? And she squared her shoulders, determined not to crumble. But then the crowd parted, and a new figure emerged, striding toward them with a purpose that turned heads. A woman. Tall, stunning, her red dress a slash of color against the muted elegance of the room. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her green eyes locked on Knox with a mix of fire and venom. "Tessa," Knox said, his voice flat, his body tensing beside Amira. She felt the shift, the way he braced himself, and her stomach tightened. "Knox," Tessa purred, stopping a few feet away, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And this must be the new Mrs. Everett." Her gaze slid to Amira, sharp and appraising, like a predator sizing up prey. "I've been dying to meet you." Amira straightened, meeting Tessa's stare head-on. "Amira," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "And you are?" "Tessa Langston," she replied, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Knox's ex, the one he didn't marry on a whim." The jab landed, and a few nearby guests turned, sensing the brewing drama. Knox stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Tessa, don't." "Don't what?" She laughed, a brittle sound, and took a step closer, her heels clicking against the marble. "Don't point out the obvious, that you traded me for her, a runaway bride's leftovers?" Her eyes flicked to Amira again, daring her to react. Amira's hands curled into fists at her sides, heat rising in her chest. "I'm not anyone's leftovers," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the room. "And I'm right where I choose to be." Tessa raised a brow, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, honey, you think you chose this? He's using you, to save face, to spite me, who knows? But don't kid yourself into thinking it's real." She turned to Knox, her smile twisting. "Tell her, darling. Tell her how you begged me to take you back last year." The accusation hung there, a grenade with the pin pulled, and Amira's breath caught. She looked at Knox, searching his face for a crack, a denial, but his jaw was locked, his silence deafening. The crowd murmured, phones discreetly raised, and the air thickened with anticipation. "Tessa, enough," Knox said finally, his voice low, dangerous. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Or are you embarrassed because she doesn't know the truth? That you're still hung up on me and this little stunt," she gestured to Amira, "is just a tantrum." Amira's pulse roared in her ears, doubt clawing at her. Was that it? Was she a pawn in some game between them? The kiss, his protection, had it all been a lie? But then she remembered the way he'd caught her on the stairs, the raw edge in his voice when he'd said her name. She wasn't a prop, and she wasn't letting Tessa rewrite her story. "Back off," Amira said, stepping between them, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "Whatever you had with him, it's over. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere just because you're throwing a fit." Tessa blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then she laughed again, sharper this time. "Feisty. Cute. But you'll see, he always comes back to me." She turned to Knox, her eyes glinting. "When you're done playing house, you know where to find me." She sauntered off, hips swaying, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Knox exhaled, his hand brushing Amira's arm, but she pulled away, her mind racing. "Is she right?" she asked, her voice low, cutting. "Is this about her?" "No," he said, firm, his eyes locking with hers. "She's a ghost who won't let go. This," he gestured between them, "is about us, nothing else." "Then why didn't you say that?" she shot back, frustration bubbling over. "You let her talk like I'm nothing." "You're not nothing," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You're my wife, and I don't owe her an explanation or you a performance." The words hit hard, grounding her, but the doubt lingered, a splinter she couldn't pull out. The gala buzzed around them, oblivious now as Tessa disappeared into the crowd, but Amira felt exposed, raw. She held his gaze, searching for the truth, and found something there. Anger, yes, but also a flicker of something deeper, something that echoed that stormy night. "Let's go," he said, his hand finding hers, firm but not forcing. "We're done here." She nodded, letting him lead her out, the weight of Tessa's words and Knox's silence pressing against her. The car waited, the night air cool against her flushed skin, and as they slid inside, she couldn't shake the question. If this wasn't about Tessa, then what was it? What drove him to her again and again, beyond the vows they'd stumbled into? The answers were still out of reach, but she'd held her ground tonight, and that at least was hers. The ride back from the gala was a tense, quiet affair, the city lights streaking past the car windows as Amira replayed the confrontation with Tessa in her mind. Knox's hand had stayed on hers, a steady anchor, but his silence gnawed at her. His words, "You're my wife," had steadied her in the moment, but the shadow of Tessa's venom lingered, stirring doubts she couldn't shake. Was she a stand-in, a distraction from a past he wouldn't let go? By the time they reached the penthouse, exhaustion had dulled her edges, and she'd retreated to her room without pressing him further, the weight of the night pulling her into a restless sleep. The next evening, the penthouse was alive with a different kind of energy. Amira emerged from her room, drawn by raised voices echoing down the hall. She paused at the top of the stairs, the marble cool beneath her bare feet, and recognized Knox's sharp tone, clipped and forceful, clashing with another, deeper, unfamiliar. Curiosity tugged her closer, her steps silent as she crept toward the source, his office, the door ajar just enough to let the argument spill out. "You can't keep this buried, Knox," the other voice said, firm and insistent. "Not now, not with her here." "I said it's handled, Noah," Knox shot back, his words edged with a rare heat. "She doesn't need to know. Not yet." Amira's breath caught, her pulse quickening. She pressed herself against the wall, out of sight, straining to hear over the thud of her heart. Noah, whoever he was, didn't back down. "You think she won't find out? That folder's a time bomb, and you're sitting on it like it's nothing. What happens when she asks about Elise?" Elise. The name hit her like a jolt, unfamiliar yet heavy with implication. Knox's response was a low growl. "Don't. That's done. It's got nothing to do with this." "Doesn't it?" Noah's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. You were engaged to her, Knox. She disappeared, and you've been chasing ghosts ever since. Now you've got Amira in the middle of it. Don't pretend this isn't connected. The air seemed to still, the weight of Noah's words sinking into her. Engaged, disappeared, a folder, secrets. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments, Knox's evasions, his intensity, the way he'd stepped into her life like he was running from something else. She edged closer, peering through the crack in the door. Knox stood by his desk, shoulders rigid, while a man, Noah, she assumed, faced him, taller and broader, his dark hair streaked with gray, his expression a mix of frustration and concern. I'm protecting her, Knox said, quieter now, but the strain in his voice was unmistakable. The less she knows, the safer she is. From what? Noah pressed, stepping forward. Drew, Elise, or you? Knox slammed a hand on the desk, the sound sharp enough to make Amira flinch. Enough. Get out. Noah didn't move for a moment, then shook his head, turning toward the door. Amira slipped back, heart pounding, and ducked into the shadowed hallway as he strode past, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She waited, breath held, until the front door clicked shut, then crept toward Knox's office again. He was alone now, staring at a closed drawer in his desk, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. She should have walked away, given him space, but the name, Elise, burned in her mind, and the questions wouldn't let her go. She pushed the door open wider, stepping inside. Who's Elise? She asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Knox's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, caught off guard. You were listening. Hard not to when you're yelling, she said, crossing her arms. Who is she, Knox? And what's in that folder? He straightened, his expression closing off, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of something, guilt maybe, or pain. It's not your business, he said, too sharp, too quick. Not my business? She stepped closer, anger flaring. I'm your wife, remember? You dragged me into this, whatever this is, and now I hear you were engaged to someone who disappeared. What am I supposed to think? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked tired, worn in a way she hadn't seen before. It's old history, he said finally, his voice low. Elise was someone I cared about, years ago. She vanished, no note, no warning. I never found out why. The admission hung there, raw and jagged, and Amira's anger softened, edged with something else, empathy, maybe, or dread. And the folder, she pressed, nodding toward the desk. He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the drawer, then back to her. It's things I've found, leads, nothing concrete. I stopped looking a long time ago. Then why's Noah so worked up about it? She took another step, closing the distance. And why does he think it's connected to me? Knox's jaw tightened and he looked away, the silence stretching taut. Because he's paranoid, he said at last, but it didn't ring true, and she could see it. The crack in his armor, the lie he wasn't selling. Knox, she said, softer now but firm. If this is about Drew, if it's about why you married me, I deserve to know. He met her eyes then, and for a moment she thought he'd tell her everything. But he shook his head, stepping back. Not tonight, he said, his voice rough. I need time. She wanted to push, to demand the truth, but the exhaustion in his face stopped her. Whatever he was hiding, it was a wound still bleeding, and she couldn't force it open. Not yet. Fine, she said, turning toward the door, but I'm not waiting forever. Amira, he called, stopping her. She glanced back, and his expression was a tangle, regret, resolve, something deeper she couldn't name. I didn't marry you because of her. I need you to believe that. She held his gaze, searching for the lie, but found only a raw honesty that unsettled her more than the secrets. Then why? She asked one last time. He didn't answer, just watched her go, and as she climbed the stairs, her mind churned. Elise, a folder, a past that wouldn't stay buried. And Knox at the center of it all, pulling her deeper into a maze she hadn't signed up for. She paused at her door, glancing back toward his office, and made a decision. If he wouldn't tell her, she'd find out herself. Whatever he was hiding, it was tied to her now, and she wasn't letting it go. Amira lingered at the top of the stairs that night, the echo of Knox's guarded words. I didn't marry you because of her, looping in her mind. The revelation of Elise, the folder, and Noah's insistence that it all connected to her had left her restless, a knot of unease tightening with every unanswered question. She'd resolved to dig deeper, to uncover what he wouldn't say, but sleep had eluded her, the penthouse feeling too vast, too silent. By morning, Knox had been gone. Another meeting, another wall between them, and she'd spent the day alone, replaying every moment, every glance, searching for the thread that tied it all together. Now evening draped the penthouse in soft shadows, the city skyline glittering beyond the windows like a promise she couldn't trust. Amira sat on the couch, a glass of wine untouched in her hand, when the front door clicked open. Knox stepped in, his coat dusted with rain, his face etched with a weariness that stopped her cold. He didn't speak at first, just shed his jacket and crossed to the bar, pouring himself a drink with hands that shook faintly, enough to make her set her glass down and stand. "Knox," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "What's wrong?" He didn't turn, just downed the amber liquid in one swallow, the clink of the glass against the counter sharp in the stillness. "I saw Noah again," he said finally, his voice rough like it had been dragged over gravel. "He wouldn't let it go." She stepped closer, her pulse ticking up. "Elise?" "No." He turned then, his eyes meeting hers, and they were raw, stripped bare in a way she hadn't seen before. "My brother, Ethan." The name landed heavy, unfamiliar, and she frowned. "Your brother?" He nodded, a single jerky motion, and moved past her to the couch, sinking into it like the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. "He died 5 years ago, and I—" His voice cracked and he looked away, staring at nothing. "I killed him." Amira froze, the words sinking in, slow and cold. She sat beside him, careful, close but not touching. "What happened?" she asked, soft but steady, giving him space to unravel. Knox leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasping tight as if to hold himself together. "We were close, too close, maybe. He was reckless, always pushing limits, chasing adrenaline. I was the one who kept him grounded, or tried to. But that night—" He paused, his breath hitching. "We'd been drinking, fighting. He wanted to drive, take his new car up the coast. I told him no, but he wouldn't listen. So I gave him the keys." Her chest tightened, the pieces falling into place. "He crashed? Went off a cliff." His voice was barely audible now, thick with guilt. "Dead before they found him. I should have stopped him, taken the keys back, anything. But I didn't. And he's gone because of me." The confession hung there, raw and bleeding, and Amira felt it, the weight he'd carried, the shadow behind every move he'd made. She reached out, tentative, her hand resting on his arm. "It wasn't your fault," she said, firm despite the ache in her throat. "You couldn't have known." "I should have," he snapped, but there was no venom in it, just pain. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers, desperate. "I've spent years trying to fix it, building this company, controlling everything, because if I don't, it happens again. People leave, people die, and I can't—" He stopped, his breath ragged, and she saw it then. The fear beneath the steel, the man who'd married her not just to save her, but to save himself. "Knox," she whispered, sliding closer, her hand moving to his cheek. His skin was warm, rough with stubble, and he leaned into her touch, eyes closing like it was the first relief he'd felt in years. "You don't have to carry it alone." He opened his eyes, and the vulnerability there cracked something in her. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Then let me help," she said, and she kissed him. Slow, tender, a lifeline in the dark. He froze for a heartbeat, then surged into her, his hands framing her face, pulling her closer with a need that matched the storm of his confession. The kiss deepened, raw and desperate, and she felt the shift, emotions spilling over, binding them in a way words couldn't. He pulled her onto his lap, her knees straddling him, and the world narrowed to the heat of his mouth, the press of his hands sliding under her shirt, igniting her skin. She tugged at his tie, fumbling with buttons, and he groaned against her lips, a sound that sent a shiver through her. Clothes fell away, a frantic tangle of fabric on the floor, and when he lifted her, carrying her to his room, the air was thick with more than desire. It was trust, grief, a collision of everything they'd held back. The bed was soft beneath her, but his touch was firm, reverent, his lips tracing her jaw, her throat, her collarbone, as if mapping her to memory. She arched into him, hands gripping his shoulders, and when he entered her, it was intense. Slow at first, then building, a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Their breaths mingled, ragged and urgent, and she felt every wall between them crumble, the guilt he'd confessed melting into something shared, something healing. "Amira," he rasped, his voice breaking as he moved with her, and she clung to him, meeting every thrust, every whispered plea, until they shattered together, emotional, overwhelming, a release that left them trembling in each other's arms. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. He traced circles on her back, silent but present, and she knew this was more than a moment. It was a turning point. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice soft in the dark, "for keeping you out." "Don't be," she said, lifting her head to meet his gaze. "Just don't do it again." He nodded, pulling her closer, and for the first time the silence between them felt whole, not heavy with secrets, but full of something new. But even as she drifted toward sleep, a quiet question lingered. If Ethan's death had shaped him this way, what else was he still holding back? What tied it to Elise, to Drew, to her? The answers could wait, for now this was enough. The warmth of that night lingered in Amira's bones, the memory of Knox's confession and their shared vulnerability wrapping around her like a quiet promise. They'd woken tangled together, his arm heavy across her waist, his breath steady against her neck. For the first time, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a space they could claim together. He'd kissed her softly before leaving for a meeting, a murmured, "We'll talk tonight," lingering in the air as he went. She'd stayed behind, tracing the lines of his life, Ethan's death, the guilt he carried, and wondering how deep those roots ran, how they tangled with her own story. Now, late afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows as Amira sorted through a stack of mail left on the counter. Bills, invitations, the usual clutter of Knox's world. Her fingers paused on a plain white envelope, no return address, her name scrawled in sharp, uneven letters. Curiosity piqued, she slit it open, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The words hit her like a punch. "You were just part of his plan." No signature, no explanation, just that stark, jagged sentence, ink bleeding slightly at the edges. Her breath caught, the room tilting as she read it again, then a third time, the words searing into her. Part of his plan. The tenderness of last night, the rawness of his confession, it crumbled under the weight of those 6 words. Her hands trembled, the letter fluttering to the counter as she backed away, her mind racing. Was this about Ethan? Elise? Drew? Or something else entirely, something he'd woven her into without her knowing. The trust she'd started to build fractured, doubt flooding the cracks. She was still standing there, staring at the note, when Knox walked in hours later, his tie loosened, his expression shifting from casual to guarded the moment he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping his keys on the table, his voice tight with sudden alertness. Amira held up the letter, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. "This came today," she said, her tone cold, cutting. "Care to explain?" He crossed the room, taking the paper from her, his eyes scanning it. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking, but he didn't flinch, just handed it back, meeting her gaze with a calm that infuriated her more. "Where'd this come from?" he asked, sidestepping her question. "I don't know," she snapped, stepping closer. "But it's about you. Part of his plan." "What plan, Knox? What am I to you?" He exhaled, slow and deliberate, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as him buying time. "It's not what you think," he said finally, his voice low, measured. "Then what is it?" She crossed her arms, her heart pounding. "Because last night I thought we were past the secrets. I thought you trusted me. But this," she jabbed a finger at the letter, "says I'm a pawn. So tell me the truth. Now." He didn't look away, but the silence stretched, heavy and damning, until he spoke. "I don't deny there was a plan," he said, and her stomach dropped, the air sucking out of the room. "But you've misunderstood it." "Misunderstood?" Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "You're admitting it? That I'm just—" "What?" "A piece you moved into place." "No," he said, stepping toward her, his voice rising with an edge of frustration. "It's not like that. When I married you, yes, I had reasons I didn't tell you. But they weren't about using you. They were about fixing something." "Fixing what?" she demanded, her hands curling into fists. "Ethan, Elise, Drew. Stop talking in circles and give me something real." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, and she saw it. The flicker of conflict, the weight of whatever he was still holding back. "Drew," he said at last, the name dropping like a stone. "It started with him. I knew he was in trouble, debts, deals, people he couldn't shake. I thought if I stepped in, if I took his place that day, I could shield you from it. Keep you safe." Her breath hitched, the pieces shifting but not fitting. "Safe from what? And why not tell me?" "Because I didn't know how deep it went," he admitted, his voice roughening. "I still don't. But it's bigger than him running out on you. And when I saw you there at the altar, I couldn't let you fall into it alone. I couldn't—" He stopped, swallowing hard, and the echo of his brother's death hung unspoken between them. "I couldn't lose someone else." She stared at him, the anger warring with a pang of something softer, grief, maybe, or understanding. "So you married me to protect me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, testing the words. "That was the plan?" "Part of it," he said, nodding once. "But it changed. You changed it. What happened after, the way I feel now, that wasn't planned. That's real." The confession hung there, raw and unsteady, and Amira's mind reeled. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the heat of last night, the way he'd bared himself to her. But the letter's poison lingered, and trust felt fragile, a thread stretched too thin. "Who sent this?" she asked, holding it up again. "If you're telling me the truth, who wants me to doubt you?" "I don't know," he said, his jaw tightening again. "But I'll find out. I promise you that." She stepped back, needing space, her thoughts a tangle of hurt and hope. "You should have told me from the start," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "No more secrets, Knox. I mean it." He nodded, his eyes locked on hers, a silent vow. "No more?" She turned away, the letter still in her hand, its words a splinter she couldn't pull out. He'd confessed a plan, but not all of it. There were still shadows, still questions. Drew's trouble, the anonymous threat, and Knox standing there, offering truth but not the whole picture. She didn't know if she could forgive him yet, but she couldn't walk away either, not when the stakes felt this high, this personal. Whatever came next, she'd face it with eyes wide open. The air in the penthouse had grown suffocating after Knox's confession, his promise of no more secrets ringing hollow against the sting of the anonymous letter. Amira had stood there, the paper crumpled in her fist, his eyes pleading for trust she wasn't sure she could give. He'd admitted to a plan, tied it to Drew's mess, swore it had morphed into something real. But the gaps in his story, the shadow of doubt, clawed at her. She'd nodded, said she needed time, and retreated to her room, the weight of his words and her own uncertainty pressing her into a sleepless night. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She couldn't stay, not like this. Now, Amira stood in the gravel driveway of her childhood home, a modest clapboard house in a small town 2 hours from the city's gleaming chaos. Her suitcase thudded beside her as the cab pulled away, dust kicking up in its wake. The air smelled of pine and earth, familiar and grounding, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of Knox's world. She'd left a note, "I need space. Don't follow me," and slipped out before he could stop her, her phone off, her resolve brittle but firm. The letter's accusation, "You were just part of his plan," had cracked something in her, and she needed to mend it alone. The screen door creaked open, and Joyce stepped onto the porch, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun, her apron dusted with flour. Amira's aunt took one look at her, red-rimmed eyes, slumped shoulders, and sighed, a sound heavy with knowing. "Come on in, girl," she said, waving her inside. "You look like you've been chewed up and spit out." Amira managed a weak smile, dragging her suitcase over the threshold. The kitchen smelled of bread and coffee, warm and steady, and she sank into a chair at the scarred wooden table, the weight of the past weeks spilling out in a rush. She told Joyce everything, Drew's abandonment, Knox's proposal, the gala, the kiss, the letter, the confession, her voice breaking as she reached the end. "I thought he was different," she said, staring at her hands. "But what if I'm just a fix for his guilt? A piece he moved to feel in control?" Joyce listened, pouring coffee into chipped mugs, her silence a comfort until Amira finished. Then she sat across from her, pushing a mug forward, her brown eyes sharp and unyielding. "So you ran," she said, not a question, just a fact. "I had to," Amira replied, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "I can't trust him. Not after that." Joyce snorted, leaning back in her chair. "You think love doesn't hurt? It does, honey. Always has, always will. That don't mean it ain't real." Amira blinked, the words landing like a slap. "This isn't love," she protested, though her voice faltered. "It's a mess. He kept things from me. Used me." "Maybe he did," Joyce conceded, sipping her coffee. "Maybe he's a fool who don't know how to say what's in his heart. But you're sitting here torn up over him, and that tells me something. You didn't walk away 'cause you don't care. You walked away 'cause you do." Her chest tightened, Joyce's bluntness cutting through the fog. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted, her voice small. "I thought I did. Last night when he opened up, when we—" She trailed off, heat rising to her cheeks, but Joyce just raised a brow, unfazed. "When you got close," she finished for her, nodding. "That's when it gets messy. Real love ain't clean, Amira. It's raw, it's ugly sometimes, and it don't come with a map. You think I stayed with your uncle through all his nonsense 'cause it was easy? Hell no. But I stayed 'cause it was worth it." Amira stared at her, the tough love sinking in, stirring the ache she'd tried to bury. "What if it's not worth it?" she asked, quieter now. What if he's still hiding something? Then you find out, Joyce said, leaning forward, her tone fierce. You don't run back to this little town and hide like a scared kid. You face it. Him, yourself, all of it. 'Cause if you don't, you'll spend your life wondering what could have been. The words hung there, heavy and true, and Amira felt them settle into her bones. She sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her as she thought of Knox. His guilt over Ethan, his protectiveness, the way he'd held her like she was his lifeline. The letter had shaken her, but Joyce was right. Running didn't erase the pull she felt, the questions she still needed answered. Was it love? She didn't know. But it was something real enough to hurt this much. She stayed the night, the familiar creak of the old house lulling her into a fitful sleep, Joyce's voice echoing in her dreams. By morning she'd decided nothing, but the seed was planted. Maybe walking away wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the start. Have you ever walked away from love only to realize it meant more than you knew? What made you go back or stay away? Drop your stories in the comments. Amira woke to the smell of frying bacon, the familiar clatter of Joyce in the kitchen, pulling her from a night of fractured dreams. Her aunt's words, "You don't run back to this little town and hide," had lodged deep, stirring a restless ache she couldn't shake. She'd spent the morning wandering the house, tracing the worn edges of her old life, but the pull of the city, of Knox, tugged harder. By noon, her phone buzzed back to life, missed calls, texts, all from him, and she stared at the screen, Joyce's tough love echoing. Face it. She didn't know if she was ready, but staying here felt like surrender. With a quiet goodbye and a promise to call, she boarded a bus back, the hum of the engine steadying her resolve. Now the penthouse loomed before her, its glass walls reflecting the dusk sky as she stepped off the elevator. Knox was there, pacing the living room, his shirt untucked, his hair a mess, a stark contrast to the polished man she'd left. He froze when he saw her, relief flashing across his face, chased by something heavier, dread maybe, or determination. "You're back," he said, his voice rough, like he'd been holding it together too long. "I had to think," she replied, dropping her bag by the door, her heart pounding. "But I'm here now, and we're finishing this." He nodded, stepping closer, but stopped short, giving her space. "I found out who sent the letter," he said, and her breath caught. The memory of those words. You were just part of his plan, surging back. It was Tessa. Tessa? She blinked, anger flaring hot and fast. "Why?" "Jealousy," he said, his jaw tightening. "She's been digging since the gala, trying to unravel us. She thought that'd do it, push you out, pull me back. But she misjudged you." Amira's hands curled, the pieces snapping into place. Tessa's venom, her taunts, her need to reclaim what she'd lost. "She doesn't get to decide that," she said, her voice steel. "But it doesn't change what you said, the plan. I need the rest, Knox. All of it." He exhaled, slow and shaky, then crossed to his desk, pulling out the drawer she'd glimpsed during his fight with Noah. He withdrew a folder, plain, worn, its edges creased, and set it on the coffee table between them. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The truth." She sat, her pulse racing, and opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of them, candid shots from company events over the past 2 years. Her laughing at a holiday party, her focused over a laptop at a team meeting, her standing by the coffee machine, unaware of the lens. Her breath hitched, her eyes snapping to his. "What is this?" "You," he said simply, sitting across from her, his hands clasped tight. "I didn't marry you out of pity, Amira, or guilt, or some grand scheme to fix Drew's mess. I married you because I've been in love with you for years." The words landed like a shockwave, stealing her air. She stared at him, the folder trembling in her hands. "What?" "I saw you," he went on, his voice steady now, raw with the truth he'd buried. "Every day at work, every meeting, every moment you didn't know I was watching. You were alive, strong, real in a way nothing else was. I kept my distance. Ethan's death, Elise, my own damn head. It all told me I didn't deserve you, but I couldn't stop wanting you." Her mind reeled, the photos a silent testament, her pouring coffee, her smiling with Lila, her unaware of his gaze. "You never said anything," she whispered, her throat tight. "I couldn't," he admitted, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You were with Drew. Happy, I thought. I told myself that was enough. But when he left you there at the altar, I saw my chance. Not to save you, but to have you. I told myself it was protection, a shield from his mess, but it was more. It was selfish. I wanted you, Amira. I always have." The confession crashed over her, a tidal wave of emotion, shock, anger, something softer she couldn't name. "So the plan," she started, her voice trembling, "was to keep you close," he finished, unflinching. "Drew's trouble was real. Debts, threats, people I'm still tracking, but it was my excuse. The moment I said those vows, it stopped being a plan. It became us." She set the folder down, her hands shaking, and stood, needing to move, to think. "You should have told me," she said, pacing to the window, the city sprawling below. "Years, Knox? Watching me, loving me, and I had no idea." "I know," he said, standing too, but keeping his distance. "I was a coward, afraid you'd see me, the real me, and walk away. Like you did yesterday." She turned, meeting his gaze, and saw it. The fear, the love, the man beneath the armor. "I walked away because I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "Because I thought I was a tool, not this." "You're not," he said, stepping closer, his voice fierce. "You're everything, and I'll spend every day proving it, if you'll let me." Her chest ached, the weight of his words sinking in, rewriting every moment. The wedding, the kiss, the night they'd shared. Tessa's letter had been a lie, a jealous twist, but it had forced this, truth she hadn't known she needed. She didn't speak, just crossed to him, her hands finding his face, pulling him down to kiss her. It was slow, deep, a sealing of something fractured and remade. When they parted, foreheads pressed together, she whispered, "No more hiding." "No more," he promised, his arms wrapping around her, holding tight. The folder lay open on the table, a past laid bare, and Amira knew this wasn't the end. Drew's shadow still loomed, Tessa's spite lingered, but it was a beginning. Real, messy, hers. The kiss lingered in the penthouse's quiet, a fragile bridge built from Knox's confession. His love from afar, the photos, Tessa's spiteful letter. Amira had stayed that night, wrapped in his arms, the folder's contents a silent witness to a truth that shifted everything. His words, "I've been in love with you for years," had cracked her open, but the weight of it, the years of silence, still churned beneath her skin. She'd left for her small town again the next morning, not to run, but to breathe, to sift through the wreckage of her heart. Joyce had watched her go with a knowing nod. No words needed. Now Amira stood in the penthouse doorway once more, the city's dusk painting the sky beyond the glass in hues of gold and gray. Her suitcase stayed in the hall. She wasn't back to stay, not yet. She'd come to confront, to demand the pieces he'd still held back, to see if this could be more than a revelation born of chaos. Knox turned from the window as she stepped in, his face tightening with a mix of hope and wariness. "You're here," he said, his voice low like he wasn't sure she'd really come. "Not to forgive," she said, her tone sharp, cutting through the space between them. "To figure this out. You don't get to drop that on me. Years of watching, a folder of my life, and expect me to just fall into it." He nodded, hands in his pockets, braced for the storm. I don't. Say what you need to. She crossed the room, stopping a few feet from him, her chest tight with everything she'd bottled up. You loved me from afar? Fine. But you married me without a word, Knox. You let me think it was pity or guilt or some noble rescue. You hid this, she gestured to the folder still on the table, and left me blind. How am I supposed to trust that? His jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. I messed up, he said, his voice rough. I thought I was protecting you. From Drew's mess, from my past. But yeah, I was protecting myself too. Afraid you'd see the truth and leave. Leave? Her laugh was sharp, raw. I didn't even know there was a truth to see. You had me up there at that altar thinking I was a fallback plan while you'd been... What? Pining? That's not love, Knox. That's control. He flinched, stepping closer, his eyes flashing. It wasn't control, it was fear. Fear of losing you before I even had you. I didn't know how to say it, how to tell you I'd watched you light up every room, every day, and couldn't breathe without wanting you. I took the chance when Drew ran, and I'd do it again. Her throat tightened, anger warring with the ache his words stirred. You should have told me, she said, her voice breaking. Before the vows, before the kiss, before I... She stopped, tears spilling hot down her cheeks, and she swiped at them, furious. Before I started falling for you. His breath caught and he closed the distance, his hands hovering near her face, not touching. You did? He asked, soft, like he didn't dare believe it. Yes, she snapped, shoving at his chest, but he didn't budge. And it hurts because I don't know what's real, your love or the plan, or us. It's all real, he said, catching her wrists, his grip firm but gentle. The plan was a spark. You're the fire. I'm not perfect, Amira. I'm a mess of guilt and ghosts, but I love you. That's not a lie. She yanked free, tears streaming now, and he let her go, his own eyes glistening. Then prove it, she said, her voice shaking. No more half-truths, no more folders, just us. He nodded, stepping back, then sank to one knee, a move so sudden it stole her breath. Marry me again, he said, his voice steady despite the sheen in his eyes. Not because of Drew or Tessa or anything else. Because I want you. Every day, every fight, every chance. Real vows, Amira. Ones that matter. She stared at him, the room blurring through her tears, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and longing. You think that fixes it, she whispered, but her resolve wavered, the rawness of him pulling her in. No, he said, rising but not crowding her. But it's a start. I'll earn it, every day, if you'll let me. Silence stretched, heavy and electric, until she stepped forward, grabbing his shirt, pulling him down to kiss her. It was fierce, messy, a clash of anger and need, tears mixing with the taste of him. He groaned into it, hands framing her face, and when they broke apart, breathless, she pressed her forehead to his. I'm still mad, she murmured, a sob catching in her throat. I know, he replied, his voice thick, holding her tight. I'll take it. They stood there, tangled in each other, and she felt it shift. The marriage, once a lifeline thrown in chaos, now a choice. Real, flawed, theirs. Yes, she said finally, quiet but sure. Real vows. He smiled, a broken, beautiful thing, and kissed her again, slower this time, a promise sealed. The past wasn't erased, Drew's shadow, Tessa's spite, the folder's weight, but it was theirs to face together. This time it wasn't a comeback to him, it was a comeback to them. The kiss that sealed their new vows lingered in Amira's memory, a fierce promise forged in tears and truth. That night, Knox had held her close, their argument fading into a quiet resolve, and the days that followed were a slow rebuilding. Real conversations, raw honesty, a marriage no longer a fluke but a choice. They'd stood before a small circle of friends and family weeks later, hands clasped, voices steady as they spoke words that mattered. I choose you, now and always. The penthouse became a home, its stark edges softened by her touch, their shared laughter, and a love that grew stronger for its scars. Now, 1 year later, Amira stood in the nursery, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, the paint cans still open, the walls a soft yellow that caught the morning light. She was 7 months pregnant, their baby a fluttering presence that anchored her to this life she'd never imagined. The crib was half assembled, Knox's tools scattered across the floor from last night's efforts, and she smiled, tracing the curve of her stomach. They'd built this, together, step by step, a real beginning born from chaos. The doorbell chimed, sharp and unexpected, pulling her from her thoughts. She padded to the living room, peering through the peephole, and froze. Drew, thinner, shadowed, his familiar face a ghost she hadn't braced for. Her heart thudded as she opened the door, one hand protective over her belly, the other gripping the frame. "Amira," he said, his voice rough, hesitant. I needed to see you." She stared at him, the man who'd left her at the altar, now standing there like a memory she'd outgrown. "Why now?" she asked, her tone steady, though her pulse raced. "Closure," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I messed up. Ran from things, debts, people I couldn't face. I've been sorting it out, and I had to say I'm sorry." Before she could respond, footsteps sounded behind her, and Knox appeared, his presence a wall at her back. His arm slid around her waist, gentle but firm, and his eyes locked on Drew, hard and unyielding. "You're late," he said, his voice low, cutting. "A year late." Drew shifted, glancing between them, her rounded belly, Knox's protective stance, and nodded, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "I know. I don't expect anything. Just wanted her to hear it." Amira's throat tightened, but she didn't falter. "I don't need your sorry," she said, her hand resting over Knox's. "I've got everything I need right here." Drew's gaze dropped, then lifted to Knox. "You won." "No," Knox replied, his tone steel. "You gave her up. I'll spend a lifetime proving why I never will." The words hung there, a vow sharper than any they'd spoken, and Drew nodded once more, stepping back. "Take care of her," he said, quiet, then turned and walked away, the door clicking shut behind him. Amira exhaled, leaning into Knox, and he pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand splaying over her belly. "You okay?" he murmured, his voice softening. "Yeah," she said, turning in his arms, meeting his eyes. "Better than okay." That night, the penthouse glowed with warm light, music drifting from the speakers, a slow, soulful tune that wrapped around them. Knox pulled her into a dance, her belly pressing against him, their steps careful but sure. The nursery stood ready behind them, painted and waiting, a testament to the life they'd carved out. She rested her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and felt it. Peace, love, a real beginning. He spun her gently, her laughter mingling with the melody, and when the song faded, he kissed her, deep and lingering, a promise in every touch. "Ours," he whispered, his hand on her stomach, and she nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "Ours," she echoed, and they stood there, swaying in the quiet, the future bright and theirs alone. What would you do if the person you were meant to marry turned out to be someone else entirely? Someone unexpected? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story touched your heart. It's been a wild ride, and I'm so glad you were here for it.